Well, let's speak now to our SABC News correspondent in the UK, Laura Makin-Isherwood. Laura, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. A very early start for the funeral proceedings of Queen Elizabeth II. Tell us what we've seen so far. And I believe at this point we're also starting to see world leaders make their way into Westminster Abbey. What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. The doors to Westminster Abbey opened at 8 a.m. this morning. That's when people are going to be allowed to go in, start taking their seats. And with around 2,000 people expected to attend, of course, it's a bit of a logistical operation. And so consequently, they are getting people into their seats as far as 3 hours ahead of this funeral service starting. Now, of course, we've also seen the end of people being able to pass through Westminster Hall to pay their respects to the Queen. Her coffin's been lying within that area, within the Houses of Parliament, which you can probably see behind me there, for the last 4 days, lying in state. And at some point overnight, officials had to tell people they simply wouldn't make it through in time. The final person had to be through those doors an hour and a half ago. And so now the people are looking at lining the streets instead to catch a glimpse of Her Majesty the Queen's coffin as it moves towards Westminster Abbey for that funeral service later this morning.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the world leaders that are in attendance. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and you can talk to me about who the standout individuals are. But there's also something to be said about who was not in attendance, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen Russia, Belarus and also Myanmar, those nations not represented here simply because of the geopolitical landscape at the moment. We've seen, of course, criticism of Myanmar and the coup there, the treatment of Rohingya Muslims, and also, of course, because of the invasion of Ukraine that Russia got underway earlier this year, and so consequently there will be no representation there. However, other heads of government from around the world, including President Biden from the US, he's been seen paying his respects to Her Majesty the Queen already, putting his hand on his heart, crossing his chest and bowing his head, and other Commonwealth nations as well have also been included. And we're going to see President Ramaphosa attend this afternoon too, or this morning, sorry, at that funeral. He's flying in to pay his respects to Her Majesty the Queen before heading off to New York.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what we're expecting to see moving forward, right, and what really the program is looking like. But I can only imagine, if you've got world leaders converging from across the globe, what the security detail must look like, Laura.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a meticulously planned operation, something that's been in the works for decades, because there are so many VIPs, if you like, in one place, in one city at one time. And so consequently, the amount of police around has been elevated, with officers being drawn in from other forces around the country and even as far as other nations. So we've seen Welsh police over in London as well. And then also there's been military personnel as well, backfilling to support the police, helping with road closures and supporting people around the city. But of course, there will be every effort to ensure that this goes without a hitch. The movement of those VIPs is essential. They've been using their motorcades, of course, to come into London, but actually moving towards the funeral service itself, it's understood that many of them may be placed together in one vehicle and driven there. Now, that's, of course, to ensure that this flows really smoothly and allows for the very many people, hundreds of thousands that are expected to descend upon London in the next few hours, can access as much of this route as possible. And as I said, with 2,000 members of the congregation expected to attend at Westminster Abbey, it is a huge undertaking, and that is why people are taking their seats already.
I mean, the numbers are quite astronomical about who's involved or who's watching and who has come to pay their last respects, right? We know that billions across the world certainly watching these proceedings. But talk to me about when we've seen the Queen of Britain lying in state, and just what that looked like when you've seen thousands upon thousands of people wanting to come and pay their last respects. What the atmosphere of that really must be, I imagine quite palpable.
Yeah, and what a sight it was, even to see that queue, because it reached around 5 miles at some point, where the government actually had to close the queue, tell people not to join in at the end there, because they were simply concerned about the sheer volume of numbers and getting them through that hall. And people were queuing through the night in quite cold temperatures as well. We've had a warm sort of September, we've had a cold snap over the last few days, and so people were wrapping up in blankets, supporting one another, making friends with strangers in that queue as well, to try to pass the hours and make it into Westminster Hall. all, but of the people that were in there, they've talked of this silence that descended upon them when they set foot and went down the steps into Westminster Hall, when they saw that casket on the catafalque raised upon that platform. They've seen, of course, King Charles III, the Queen's son, and his siblings standing vigil around the coffin, and the Queen's grandchildren as well. All 8 of those were there standing guard, if you like, over their grandmother. It has been quite a sight to behold over the last 4 days, and people have come away from it saying that it was something that they will never feel like they can experience ever again. And so now all the build-up is about paying respects to the monarch that spent 70 years on the throne, Britain's longest reigning queen.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura. And that sight to behold is still very much on its way. We will see, of course, King Charles III leading that procession with the body of Queen Elizabeth II of Britain. And that procession, of course, will also be led by a massed pipes and drums of the Scottish and Irish regiments, the Brigade of Gurkhas and the Royal Air Force, numbering 200 musicians, and we'll be bringing you those visuals live right here on The Agenda on SABC News.